What happens when a legendary country icon walks into what should be a simple daytime interview, only to be greeted with the coldest welcome of his entire career? What happens when decades of respect, artistry, and grace collide headfirst with modern on-air ego? Today's story reveals the clash that left Joy Behar storming away from her own desk after Willie Nelson responded with a level of quiet power no one expected. The studio was buzzing that Tuesday morning, but it wasn't the usual cheerful hum. Willie Nelson, calm as ever at 90 years old, settled into the guest chair he'd sat in 1,000 times across his long career. From Carson to Letterman, he'd seen every kind of TV personality, but something in the air today felt different. Joy Behar wasn't her usual comedic self. She flipped through her note cards with a kind of restless irritation, stealing glances at Willie like she was already annoyed the moment he walked in. The crew called out a 30-second countdown. Willie adjusted his braids, preparing to talk about his new album, one he'd poured heart and soul into. But then came the comment, a mutter, a whisper that wasn't as quiet as she assumed. "I still don't get why we're giving this much time to a guy whose music peaked in the 70 seconds. Her co-hosts froze. Willie heard every word. What Joy said next, just seconds before the cameras went live, was so blunt, so dismissive, that even the production team stopped in their tracks. The countdown reached 5, 4, 3, and the room felt like it was holding its breath. Willie Nelson sat quietly, hands folded, eyes steady. But Joy Behar? She leaned back in her chair with a smirk that said she'd already made up her mind about the man sitting across from her. When the cameras lit up, Whoopi Goldberg greeted the audience with her usual warmth. "We're here with the legendary Willie Nelson, celebrating the release of his 73rd studio album." But Joy didn't wait. She cut straight through Whoopi's introduction like a blade slicing a ribbon. 73 albums, Willie? Don't you think you've exhausted everything you have to say by now?" Her tone wasn't curious. It wasn't journalistic. It was mocking sharp enough to make the other hosts shift in their seats. Willie smiled politely, but his eyes narrowed just a touch. "Well," he said gently, "I believe creativity doesn't really expire with age. My new record explores." But Joy wasn't done. "Oh, come on, Willie. You're pushing 90, singing about modern issues. Isn't it time to give newer artists room to shine?" the audience murmured. A few gasps slipped through. Even the floor manager looked stunned. Whoopi tried to redirect the conversation, but Joy talked right over her. Her interruptions weren't questions. They were jabs. And for the first time in his long career, Willie could feel it. The interview wasn't going to be a conversation. It was a setup. But Joy had no idea that her next comment would ignite a response that would change the entire direction of the show and expose her in front of millions. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. Joy leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on Willie with a look that wasn't curiosity, it was challenge. "So let's talk relevance," she said, tapping her cards. "Do you really think younger artists collaborate with you because they want to? Or is it just charity?" A cruel smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You know, a pity project?" The room froze. Even the audience sucked in a breath. Willie blinked once, slowly, calmly. He'd been insulted before, mocked before, but never on live television, never with this level of intentional disrespect. "Well, Joy," he said evenly, "in my 60-plus years of making music, I've learned collaborations happen out of mutual respect, not pity." His voice was soft, yet somehow carried more weight than any shout could. Joy scoffed loudly. "Mutual respect? Billie Eilish? Really? You honestly expect anyone to believe she wasn't just doing you a favor?" Whoopi shot her a warning look. Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably. Alyssa looked like she wanted to disappear under the table, but Joy was on a roll and blind to the disaster she was building. "That's the thing about older artists," she said casually. "You all cling to relevance by attaching yourselves to whoever's trending." Willie's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A subtle shift, a quiet tightening. Because now, Joy wasn't just insulting his work, she was diminishing his legacy, and that finally sparked something in him. The next words Willie chose were polite, but powerful enough to stop the studio cold and flip the energy of the entire interview. Willie shifted slightly in his seat, folding his hands in his lap, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that carried decades of patience behind it. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "Joy," he said, "it's interesting you brought up age, because the way you're framing it sounds less like journalism and more like something else entirely." Joy raised an eyebrow, amused. Oh, enlighten me. He met her stare with quiet steadiness. Ageism, he replied. Some might call it that. A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Joy laughed, but it wasn't a natural laugh. It was sharp, defensive. So now I'm ageist? Please, I'm being realistic. There's a time to step aside. Your era ended decades ago. The other hosts looked horrified. Sarah glanced at the cameras, silently begging for a commercial break. Alyssa shook her head, whispering, "This is going too far." Even the floor manager made a slicing gesture across his neck, signaling stop. Joy ignored all of them. "If anything," she continued, "you're just proving my point by being sensitive about it." Willie took a breath, slow, steady, full of self-control. "I'm not sensitive," he said, "but I do believe in respecting people who've dedicated their lives to their craft." Then, after a beat, "And dismissing someone's entire career because of their age? Well, that says more about the interviewer than the artist." The studio went silent. Joy's smile faltered. For the first time in the interview, she looked rattled. But instead of backing down, Joy doubled down, and her next comment crossed a line Willie never expected anyone to cross on live television. Joy leaned back, arms folded, a spark of irritation in her eyes. Willie's calm confidence wasn't the reaction she wanted, and that only pushed her further. "Oh, please," she said loudly, waving a hand. "Let's not pretend your activism or your music carries the same weight it once did. Farm Aid? Really? Isn't that just a nostalgic stunt at this point?" That did it. The audience shifted in unease. This wasn't the playful banter they expected. This was something bordering on mean-spirited. Alyssa's jaw dropped. Sarah whispered, "Did she just?" But Joy continued, oblivious to the shock around her. "I mean, honestly, if farmers haven't figured things out after 40 years of you holding charity concerts, maybe they don't deserve to be rescued by musicians who peaked before the internet existed." Several people in the crowd gasped. One woman covered her mouth. A man near the back muttered, "That's too much." Willie didn't move, but something in his expression changed, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a quiet disappointment that carried more weight than anger ever could. "Joy," he said softly, "you're talking about hardworking people who put food on every table in this country. They're not begging for handouts. They're surviving." Joy rolled her eyes. "Oh, spare me the Heartland sermon. Times change. Industries evolve. Maybe yours should have bowed out gracefully." Whoopi tried to jump in. Willie, let's..." But Willie held up a gentle hand, stopping her. He looked at Joy with the kind of patience only a 90-year-old man with a lifetime of wisdom could possess. And then he spoke the sentence that stunned the studio into silence. What Willie said next wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but it was powerful enough to shift the entire balance of the interview in a single moment. Willie leaned forward just slightly, resting his hands on the table. His voice, when he spoke, was soft enough that the microphone almost seemed unnecessary. "Joy," he said, "I've met critics, but I've rarely met someone so determined to misunderstand a person before the conversation even begins." The audience murmured. It wasn't an insult, it was an observation, and somehow that made it hit harder. Joy blinked, surprised. "Excuse me? You heard me," Willie replied gently. "You came into this segment with your mind made up. Not about my music, but about me." Joy let out a strained laugh, but it didn't land. "Oh, please, don't play psychologist. I'm doing my job." "Are you?" Willie asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels less like journalism and more like personal frustration." The entire studio stilled. Whoopi glanced at the camera crew as if to ask, "Are we still live?" Sarah froze with her note cards halfway lifted. Alyssa raised her brows, impressed despite herself. Joy shifted in her chair. "I'm not frustrated. I'm being honest. Someone has to challenge the myth that you're untouchable." Willie nodded slowly. "I appreciate honest questions. What I don't appreciate is cruelty disguised as honesty." That line hit like a bell, clear, sharp, undeniable. Joy opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because now the audience was reacting not with boos, but with silence. A silence that carried disapproval and a growing respect for Willie's composure. And then Willie added the sentence that pushed Joy straight over the edge. "Hurting people isn't journalism, Joy. It's just hurting people." Joy's mask slipped completely, and what she did next shocked even her co-hosts, who had never seen her unravel this fast on live TV. Joy's face tightened, her usual confident smirk replaced by something sharper, something unsettled. Willie's calmness wasn't just deflecting her blows, it was exposing them. And that, more than anything, made her lose control. "Oh, don't lecture me," she snapped. "I've been in television longer than some of your fans have been alive. I don't need a morality lesson from a man who thinks folksy charm excuses outdated music." The audience reacted instantly. Another wave of gasps, a few head shakes. Even the camera operators exchanged glances. Whoopee attempted damage control. Okay, let's bring this back." But Joy cut her off. "No, I'm not done." She jabbed a finger toward Willie. "You walk in here acting like the wise old grandfather of the music industry. But the truth is you're clinging to relevance, and the only reason you're sitting in that chair is because producers thought it'd be cute to book a legend." Silence. Even the producers behind the glass looked stunned. Willie didn't flinch. Not once. If anything, his expression softened not with pity, but with a kind of sadness that struck deeper than anger ever could. "Joy," he said quietly, "why does my presence bother you so much?" That simple question made Joy recoil like she'd been burned. "It doesn't," she barked, but her voice cracked just enough for everyone to hear it. "You're twisting this. I'm asking the tough questions." "No," Willie replied. "You're attacking someone who walked in here with nothing but respect for this show." A murmur spread through the crowd. Joy's cheeks flushed, her composure slipping like sand through her fingers. And then she unleashed the one line, the one insult that sent the entire studio into chaos and sealed her fate on live television. Joy's breathing was heavier now, her posture tense, her composure slipping by the second. Willie's calm responses weren't just diffusing her, they were revealing her, and she could feel it. With a shaky laugh, she leaned forward and delivered the line that no one, not even the most cynical viewers, saw coming. "You know what, Willie?" she hissed. "Your guitar is just like your career, falling apart. Maybe it belongs in a museum right next to you." The room exploded. Gasps. Cries of, "Oh my God." One audience member actually shouted, "That's too far." Even Joy's co-hosts went pale. Whoopi's eyes widened as she whispered, "Joy, no." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Alyssa looked physically ill, but the person with the softest reaction was Willie. He reached down and gently touched the worn, beloved guitar beside him, the instrument that had traveled thousands of miles with him, held decades of stories, and carried pieces of his soul in every scratch. When he looked back up, his expression wasn't angry. It was heartbreakingly disappointed. "This guitar," he said slowly, "has been by my side longer than most people stay in this business. Every mark on it has a story, a memory, a life lived." Joy rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, spare me. It's a prop at this point, just like the legend you keep trying to play." The studio went dead silent. Willie nodded just once, as if he'd made a decision in that exact moment. "You know, Joy," he said, "there's a difference between honest critique and cruelty with a smile." Her smirk faltered, and then Willie delivered the speech, calm, sharp, and unforgettable, that stripped Joy's on-air persona bare and turned the entire audience against her. Willie sat up straighter, his hands resting gently on the worn guitar Joy had just mocked. His expression was steady, maybe even kind, but the energy in the room shifted instantly. Everyone felt it. Something important was about to be said. "Joy," he began softly, "I've been interviewed by people who disagreed with me, people who didn't understand my music, people who weren't fans at all. And that's fine. That's part of life." Joy swallowed, her eyes darting nervously, but Willie continued before she could interject. "But I've never in all my years been on a show where the goal wasn't conversation, but humiliation." A ripple moved across the audience. Even the co-host sat frozen. "You haven't asked questions today," Willie said. "You've taken swings." Joy laughed shakily. "Oh, come on." Willie raised a hand, gentle but authoritative. "And the strangest part," he said, "is that for someone who claims my time is over, you seem to know my career better than some of my fans." The crowd murmured. "You mentioned my albums, my collaborations, my charity work. You've done your homework. For someone who believes I'm irrelevant." Joy shifted in her chair, color rising in her cheeks. Willie leaned in ever so slightly. "You're not frustrated with my career, Joy. You're frustrated with something else, something inside yourself. And today, you aimed it at me." Her breath caught. "Because what you've shown on this stage isn't honesty," he said. "It's pain dressed up as criticism. The audience gasped not at the harshness, but at the accuracy. You could feel the truth ripple through the room. Joy's composure shattered. "How dare you?" But Willie spoke softly over her. "Joy, when you go home tonight and look in the mirror, will you be proud of how you treated someone who walked in here with nothing but respect?" She froze. Joy's chest rose and fell rapidly. Willie's calm words, measured, steady, and painfully true, hit her harder than any insult ever could. The audience watched in stunned silence as her facade cracked completely. "I don't have to listen to this," she snapped, pushing back from the table. "I am not the villain here." Whoopi reached out instinctively. "Joy, sit down." "No," she shouted. "I'm done being lectured by some washed-up relic trying to stay relevant." The crowd reacted instantly. Boos mixed with shocked cries. One woman near the front yelled, "Apologize." Another shouted, "That was wrong." Willie sat perfectly still, hands resting lightly on his guitar, his expression calm, almost gentle. Not a single ripple of anger crossed his face. Joy ripped off her microphone, the cable snapping against the desk. "You can finish this circus without me," she barked, turning toward the exit. But before she reached the edge of the stage, Willie spoke softly. "Joy, I hope you find whatever it is you're fighting." She froze for half a second, stung by the kindness she wasn't expecting, then stormed out, disappearing behind the curtain. The studio doors slammed shut. Silence. Then, slowly, Willie stood and gave a faint, knowing smile to the audience. "Well," he said, "I guess we have a little extra time to talk about the music now." The crowd erupted applause, cheers, relief washing through the studio. Even the co-host looked grateful that the storm had passed. Whoopi managed a shaky smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, Willie Nelson." Willie lifted his guitar and strummed a warm, gentle chord. "Sometimes," he said, looking into the camera, "the best thing you can do is stay true to yourself, even when someone tries to tear you down." The audience rose to their feet, and with that, the most uncomfortable and unforgettable interview in daytime television came to a close.